Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating dynamic you've almost certainly encountered out in the wild. And hey, maybe you'll even recognize a bit of yourself in this one. We're going to dive deep into the psychology behind why some individuals process so much more than they actually express. It's a behavioral dynamic that gets completely misunderstood all the time, so I'm really excited to look under the hood and see exactly how this works. So I want you to picture someone specific right now. Maybe it's a coworker in a frantic meeting who just sits back while everyone else is loudly pitching ideas. Or, maybe it's that one friend at a chaotic dinner party who seems perfectly happy just quietly watching the whole scene unfold. Have you ever noticed that one person in the room who speaks very little, but somehow seems to catch absolutely every single detail? They stay quiet, they listen intently, and they reveal pretty much nothing on the surface. Now, it is incredibly easy to look at that and think, oh, they're disinterested or they're just aloof. But as the psychology we're looking at today reveals, that silence, it's doing a ton of heavy lifting. In fact, there is a complex, deeply active process happening right behind their eyes. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the active inner mind. Psychology actually shows us that silence usually hides a deeply active mental state, not an empty one. When a quiet person doesn't respond instantly to a question, it's not because their brain is turned off. Actually, they're running through a rapid, highly involved internal process. Think of it like a massive mental sorting room. Step 1, their brain receives the details. They're just gathering all the raw data from the conversation. Step 2, and this is really where the magic happens, they explore the angles. A single, seemingly simple topic can instantly spark a massive web of internal thoughts and associations. While someone else might just blurt out the very first thing that pops into their head, our quiet processor is looking at the issue from like 3 different perspectives, weighing the pros and cons, and anticipating how everyone else is going to react. By the time they actually get to step 3, speaking, they've already mentally mapped out the entire landscape. Silence isn't an absence of thought. For them, it's just the required workspace for unpacking complex things. Which brings us nicely to Section 2, sponges, not megaphones. It really helps to think about how different people operate socially by looking at 2 very distinct modes of communication. On one side, you have broadcasting. This is basically acting like a megaphone. The entire goal here is pushing information out into the world, dominating the room, and making absolutely sure your thoughts are heard right now. But on the other side, you have absorbing. This is acting like a sponge. The primary function here is bringing information in. Quiet people naturally lean toward being sponges. They just aren't interested in competing for airtime. Instead, they use their silence to actively pull the world in around them. They let the noise wash over them, selectively soaking up only the most important pieces of information, rather than constantly pushing their own noise out. And while everybody else is hyper-focused on what they're going to say next, the sponge is busy noticing things that completely slip past the broadcasters. They're watching behavior, they're reading tone, they track the subtle reactions of everyone in the room. Think about what this actually looks like in real life. They notice that tiny little hesitation in someone's voice when they agree to a new project, or they spot the subtle shift in body language between 2 people sitting across the table. They are picking up on all these complex social patterns while everyone else is just busy talking. This active absorption makes them far more aware of their surroundings and the emotional temperature of the room than they might seem. They're gathering intelligence, not just waiting for their turn to talk. Moving right along to Section 3, the power of pauses. We have all been there, right? That agonizing silence in an elevator or on a first date and someone just starts rambling about the weather purely to fill the void. A lot of people talk just to avoid that awkwardness. But for a quiet mind, silence is comfortable. It's a completely pressure-free zone. It is free from the overwhelming pressure to fill every single second with sound. Silence just doesn't stress them out the same way it stresses out other people. They don't feel responsible for keeping the air filled with noise, so they literally don't experience that panic need to generate idle chatter. Because they're perfectly comfortable in the pause, they only break that silence when they feel they have something of actual genuine value to add. Let's just pause and slow down for a second to really picture this next analogy, because it gets right to the heart of how quiet people experience socializing. Think of constant, meaningless small talk as a shallow puddle. It's entirely surface level, it's repetitive, and frankly, it doesn't really go anywhere. For a quiet mind, splashing around in that shallow puddle is incredibly draining. The cognitive load required to pretend to be deeply interested in everyday, mundane topics takes a massive amount of energy. So if the talk feels empty, they naturally withdraw to conserve that energy. But if you drop them into a deep ocean of useful, intentional, complex conversation, oh, that is where they thrive. They absolutely don't hate talking. They just intensely dislike meaningless conversation. They crave the depth and the exploration of the deep ocean. Now let's look at Section 4, guarding the inner world. I find this next concept so relatable. Some individuals naturally act like a protective vault. Quiet minds often have incredibly rich, vibrant inner lives, but they treat that inner world with maximum security. They naturally keep their thoughts, their deepest opinions, and their vulnerabilities locked away. They simply do not share everything they think or feel with everyone they meet. It is a highly deliberate, conscious choice to maintain tight control over what others know about them. You essentially have to earn the combination to the vault. They'll share pieces of themselves, but only with the people they've carefully observed and deemed fully trustworthy over time. Because fundamentally, speaking less just feels emotionally safer. This is entirely about self-protection. Think about it. When you put your thoughts out into the world, you open yourself up to judgment, misinterpretation, or even conflict. By keeping the vault locked and strictly limiting what they broadcast, their quietness acts as an impenetrable psychological shield. It's an incredibly smart, highly effective way to navigate an unpredictable world while keeping your emotional core secure. They aren't staying quiet because they're afraid. They're staying quiet because they're actively guarding their most valuable assets. And that brings us to our fifth and final section. Quiet does not mean weak. This right here is where quiet people get misunderstood the most. The common myth is that silence equals shyness, low confidence, or being antisocial. People look at them and assume, oh, if you aren't talking, you must lack the courage to speak up. But the psychological reality is completely different. This silence is deliberate. It's a firm choice, and it's actually a sign of profound strength. Their minds just operate differently. They aren't hiding away because they're weak. They are simply choosing not to waste their energy speaking unnecessarily. They are entirely comfortable in their own skin, and they just don't need that external validation that comes from constant talking. It really all comes down to this. Choosing your words carefully often makes your presence so much stronger. Think about the dynamics of literally any group you've ever been in. When the person who never stops talking speaks, people eventually just tune them out, right? It becomes background noise. But when someone who rarely speaks finally clears their throat and leans in, the entire room stops to listen. They command instant respect. Because they don't water down their impact by splashing around in that shallow puddle of endless small talk, their careful, deliberate word choice gives them a powerful, commanding presence. When they speak, you know for sure it's because it's something worth hearing. Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. We live in a world that pretty much acts like a giant megaphone. It is constantly obsessed with making noise, demanding attention, and filling every available millisecond with sound. But knowing what we know now about the deep, active, incredibly observant psychology of silence, what could you learn by simply acting a little more like a sponge and embracing the pause?